from, why it is such an important thing for me, and why it's also an important thing for me to take what I've learned and relay to other veterans in encouraging them to seek mental health. I am born and bred in rural Appalachia. So, long before I went in the military, I've probably told this story in San Francisco, but where I am from, we look forward to getting our first firearm before we even think about a driver's license.
Do us a favor and tell the listening audience what Appalachia is if they're not from, West Virginia or Tennessee.
Okay, that's
Pennsylvania.
Basically, the very Appalachian. The mountain chain runs from Maine to Atlanta, Georgia area. I don't know exactly where it ends. Don't know exactly where it starts, but I am right in the middle of the border of Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia. Put a pin in those three, and I'm right there. Very rural, very isolated. We are really not well off. Most people aren't well off as far as like socioeconomics. It's generally a poorer population. And that's one of the reasons that, like for us, firearms growing up are a big deal. I know people that when the factories shut down, when the mines shut down, like basically we have to rely on those firearms as tools. Tools for putting food in the freezer to get through the winter. And those are the first kind of skills that you learn. But we're also taught safety from an early age, like how to manage those firearms. Everybody in my state's required to take a hunter safety course, how to cross a fence, proper storage, all the fundamentals. Assume that every firearm that you come across is loaded. Never point a weapon at somebody, loaded or unloaded, unless you intend to use it. Know what is behind your target. Basically, just all the fundamentals of firearm safety. Now, you take that forward, for instance, when Trey was giving his intro, talking about his captain telling him things on the plane. My first deployment, being from the buckle of the Bible Belt here, I was a paramedic certified when I went into the military and trained with an infantry unit, got on a plane and kind of got some of the same speech that Trey got, and moved up front to sit by the chaplain and spent about 16 hours on a plane picking his brain. Like, how do I reconcile the fact that my job is to save lives, but you're telling me that I'm also going to have to potentially send a round downrange and take a life? How do I wrap that around my upbringing, my training, the whole nine yards? So come to find out, medic in the infantry, you're just a medic with a gun. You're still a grunt. I don't claim to be an infantry guy, but all my infantry buddies I serve with, they're like, hey, you're one of us, Doc. Don't worry about it. Fast forward to that, you get out of the military, you come back home, you're struggling with mental health, and you hear all these things basically the majority of your life. When stuff happens in the news, like, oh, man, mental illness. I wonder if that guy was in treatment. If he was in treatment, he shouldn't have had a firearm. Whoa. I mean, I spent like 8 years, where that firearm was a weapon. But it was also a tool. Just like Trey said, that was a tool to keep me safe, to keep my buddies safe, to make sure that we all got back home. And now you're telling me to put my tools away. And that was one of the tools that I also use to maintain wellness. Like when I need to blow off steam, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I go to the range. I'll go take a couple of boxes of shells and just go shoot. It relieves so much stress. But I'm seeing on the news that, like, if you go for treatment, you shouldn't have that firearm. You shouldn't have that weapon. And so I found myself at a place again trying to reconcile mixed messaging. Like, I was capable of maintaining that safely while in the military, but now the things I'm hearing, and I don't want to get into politics or media, but that's where the messages are coming from. Like, oh, you shouldn't have that. And so I work really hard with veterans that I see transitioning that dealt with that same kind of thing about education is the first key. It's like we are educated on all the ins and outs of the military and how to maintain our firearms, our weapons, keeping our buddies safe, all that good stuff. Like, we have to learn how to keep ourselves safe, but we also need to learn how to do that and still maintain our rights. And so that's kind of one of the ways that I use to bridge with folks is just to dispel some of that myth that as a mental health worker, my goal of getting them into treatment is to either A, create a list, or B, take their firearm from them in some shape, form, or fashion. And, I just use my own experiences of saying, like, look, guys, I'm still a concealed carry holder for the state of Tennessee, firearms instructor for my local gun club, and have been in treatment for PTSD. The fact that you go for treatment, whether it's PTSD, depression, where doesn't automatically mean your rights are taken, your firearms are going to be taken. And I think that's the message that we've got to get across. And you talked about that divide when something happens. I think we spend too much time talking about, like, I'm over here and I'm so, like, you'll pry my gun from my cold dead hand. And then on the other side, we've got those of us in mental health that are like, whoa, we recoil when we hear that someone with a mental health diagnosis may have a firearm. We can't be fixed in those positions. We got to figure out all the stuff that we agree on that's in the middle. As a mental health professional, as a veteran, as a human being, suicide, the thought, I've lost friends after I got out of the service to suicide. And that was harder on me than losing guys while we were deployed. And I think no matter where you stand, like, every gun owner I know is appalled by suicide, hates, that we can't do more. How do we do more? And I think that the first place we've got to start to do, or the first thing we've got to start to do, is come out of our trenches and meet in the middle and talk about all the things we agree on and leave the things that we don't agree on, that we'll probably never agree on, in our trenches.
Well, that concludes our podcast for today. No, I'm just kidding.
Mike drop.
Trey, yeah. No, Trey, go.
Yeah, ironically, my story is almost a complete opposite of Jay's when it comes to firearms. I grew up in Dallas, and everyone thinks that if you're from Texas, that you wear cowboy boots, you have a horse, and you shoot guns all the time. And I did own cowboy boots. I did not have a horse. I had a Mustang, but it was a car, not a horse. But the only experience I had with firearms until I joined the Marine Corps was at my buddy's ranch, who had horses, but we'd shoot snakes or cans or some little 22. But I didn't know anything about them. I wasn't a firearm. Not that I was against them. I just didn't have any experience. My parents were not firearm people, so I was never really around them until I joined the Marine Corps. And second stage of boot camp, you go up to Camp Pendleton, and they teach you how to shoot and all that. And I remember pulling the trigger for the first time, and someone just kind of awoke in me. I was like, oh, I get it. And this was fun. And it just kind of clicked. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to lie. I was nervous. I was kind of scared. And at the time I didn't realize that the 2.23 round, or the 5.56, what we used, wasn't this enormous projectile. It wasn't this thing that's going to reach out 2,000 yards and touch you. But, I was nervous because I had never held an M16A2, and I was like, oh, what is, and it was awesome. And then you get to learn to shoot some handguns, the M9. Before we went overseas, I had to do foreign weapons training, so I got introduced to the 47s, the 74s, and learned how those went, and I was hooked, and it was interesting. And but when it comes to the firearm side of mental health, on the veteran side of things, I remember kind of going back to my initial story, being 19 years old, basically straight out of schooling, and told that you've got 2 months to work up and you guys are heading out. And so you're training basically maybe 18, 19 hours a day for 2 months. I'm trying to catch up. And I'm with guys that were in Desert Storm, and these guys are, I'm like this kid from Dallas, and so I'm just trying to keep my head down and move quickly and learn and absorb like a sponge. And you get to a place, and video games doesn't do it justice. I can put it to you that way. If you think it's like Call of Duty, then you're not going to last very long. And I'll say this, and this is one of those things where I get asked a lot, first time when you heard an AK go off in real life, and if you've never heard an AK-47 full auto, it is a completely different sound than you've ever heard if you've never been around firearms. A full auto AK-47, it'll get you. And anyone that says that they're not scared the first time is either lying or crazy, and maybe both. I don't know. But I'm not going to lie. I was terrified, and I'm free to admit that. I have no quarrels admitting that I was absolutely terrified. But the good thing about it is once again, I was so young with zero experience, and I'm basically told to do a job. So mentally at the time, I was just doing a job. I was doing exactly what I was trained to do, and nothing more, nothing less. And if one of my corporals or sergeants told me to do this, I was a PFC, an E2. Roger that, Sergeant. Roger that, Corporal. Yes, sir, I'm on it. And he just did it. And we left there, went to Korea on the way back to Okinawa, where we were based out of. Went back to Korea, stopped there for a couple of days to do some interesting things. And then went to SEER training over at Camp Fuji, at Mount Fuji, Japan, which is basically survival school, if you want to call it that. And I'm sure both of you guys know what SEER is. But so at this point, I'm 19 years old, and I'm just getting like everything just thrown at me. And it's hard for me to decipher. I will say that after all of that, I learned very quickly how to compartmentalize the rest of my life. And I still hold that today, that I'm able to put different scenarios and different things into certain sections of my brain to either forget about them or to deal with them or to just, if nothing else, organize them. And when I got back and I got out, I left the Marine Corps with a bitter taste in my mouth. I had a couple issues with some people towards the end of my enlistment that it took me a while to get back into the love of the Marine Corps. But when I started kind of shooting competitively and all of that, I'm still a huge proponent of concealed carry. That's one of my biggest missions. I think that we need to be our own personal warriors. We have to be our own first responders to a certain extent, that an everyday warrior is so important to the grand scheme of things. And hearing these horror stories about, I was never really, I don't know how to put this. I was two-way ignorant. I was never I've never been anti two-way, but I was two-way ignorant. I just like guns, and I didn't really understand the politics of it. And when you start hearing things that happened in like 2012, and we don't need to talk about that, but terrible tragedies that happen at these schools and all of that, you start hearing the bad side of what people think of gun owners. And so the Armed Citizen podcast has really turned into breaking down stigmas of what the general public think of us as gun owners, and let them know that, hey, we're just normal everyday people. We have normal jobs. We coach Little League. We go to church with you. We're the guys cooking the burgers at the cookouts on 4th of July and all of that. And you may not have known for the last 10 years that, and this happened to me actually, the first 10 years that I was here, very few people knew that I carried. I don't go around, hey, I'm a gun guy and I'm concealed carrying. I don't want anyone to know that. Sometimes that's a tactical advantage sometimes. But as I started doing the YouTube and the podcasting and all of that stuff, started doing competitive shooting, people started realizing, oh, he's a gun guy. And you coached my daughter in softball. Did you have a gun on? No, no, I didn't have a gun on the softball field, but they just assumed that we're these crazy tin foil hat wearing, people that are just waiting to overthrow the government. I guess that's what a lot of people think we are. And so that was the whole purpose, is for me to explain people that we're just normal everyday people that like to exercise our Second Amendment rights. We enjoy guns, but like Jay was saying, everything that most of us, I would say that 98% of us, 99.9% of us almost, everything we do is safety. Everything we do is understanding that we're trying to keep other people, not just ourselves, safe. And we are probably the most responsible citizens there are, because we don't just responsible for driving, but we're responsible. We're carrying a firearm. We take great pride in that. And we're hoping that people understand that just because you just found out that I carry a gun, now you won't talk to me, but we were best friends 10 years ago when you didn't think I carried a gun. And that's where it is. And as far as the mental, I'm trying to tie this in, I'm sorry. As
You're
far as
good. We'll eventually tie it in anyway. It's okay.
yeah, as far as the mental health side of things,